This conference will now be recorded.
All right, we're now being recorded. I don't know if everybody else heard that. This is being recorded. Great segue into that, and will be available online later at the Longview Chamber website, www.longviewchamber.com. And for those of you that have joined us, you will receive an email letter today with that link, and also I think with a questionnaire. And we just thank you again. We'd like to consider you taking that link and sharing it with other business associates and affiliations that you have in the East Texas area. Next, before we get into the presentation, there are a couple things that we'd like to make you aware of. If you do not see the title screen, look to your toolbar. You should see an orange flower-like icon. You would definitely want to use that. If you need anything there, make sure that you get the title screen. Also, make sure that you know where your microphone and your camera options are. Lord knows that sometimes we need to turn off the camera if something needs to happen. That is okay. Also, as a host, we have the ability to mute if we're hearing some background noise. So if you need to speak, please make sure that you unmute before you speak, so know where those two buttons are. We absolutely want this to be a back and forth conversation, so we will have a quick presentation, but when the time comes, we do want participation, and so please make sure that you know where your unmute is. Also, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, on the right side of top right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat button. And that will let Stephanie, our organizer, know that you're having some issues, or if you need to ask a question, that will go directly to the organizer. So Stephanie, appreciate you running things in the background so that we can have this conversation. We would love to take an opportunity to thank our sponsors today. This immigration discussion is being presented by the Hilton Garden Inn, and we would also like to thank our continuing advocacy sponsors, presenting sponsor AEP SWEPCO, and gold sponsors Austin Bank, Republic Services, Spring Hill State Bank, and Starfish Ad Age. On the behalf of the Longview Chamber of Commerce, it is important that we share that the team here is thinking about you. We understand that times are rough, hence the reason why we're not meeting in person today. And we also understand that it can be a kind of a painful season, both for our business community and our community at large. And so we're just constantly looking for answers. Part of that is having a robust discussion like we are today. We are in some uncharted waters, and we don't have all the answers, but we do have access to subject matter experts and to those folks that we would like to just start the conversations that we need to have in our business and in our community. So that subject matter expert today that we have found is our guest, Chelsie Kramer, the state of Texas organizer with the New American Economy. If you have your video up and live, you should see Chelsie there. Chelsie became acquainted with the Longview Chamber and with Kelly Hall there at when she was with the Texas Association of Business. She then took on a new role with the national organization called the New American Economy. This organization is able to advance policy that would strengthen our local economies. As a result, we contracted with NAE to better help us understand the demographics and economic contributions of immigration and immigrants and specifically in our region and in the Longview area. At this time, Chelsie, I would like to turn the program over to you, and looking forward to a great presentation.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was a really kind introduction. And thank you all for having me virtually. I wish we could be there in person, but hopefully we can have a really great discussion here. Like Mark mentioned, I'll give you a little bit more background on myself so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. I was with the Texas Association of Business for almost, I guess, a little over 4.5 years. I was there under Bill Hammond, Jeff Mosley, and Chris Wallace, and so all really, really great leaders. And so I was very, very fortunate to be able to work with them and still work with them today in my capacity with New American Economy. Prior to being with the Texas Association of Business, I worked for State Senator Tommy Williams for a couple of legislative sessions there in Austin when he was chairing finance. And so that's where my background is really working with more of the moderate Republicans and conservative, more fiscally minded conservative Republicans is what my background has been up to this point, especially within the business community. Excuse me. And not too long ago, about two years ago, this national organization that I work for now, New American Economy, had contacted me and asked if I was interested in helping them reach out to the business community within Texas and really find out where they were when it came to talking about immigration, what their issues were, what their fears were, what their hopes were, and really just have a really better understanding of Texas. Because the national organization, New American Economy, what we really do focus on is helping disseminate facts. And so we have a very large and really very robust research team. And what we do is pull data from the American Census, American Community Survey, the U.S. Budget Office, all from government sources about how immigrants are affecting your local economy. And then we help tell that story. And what we find is when the business community really works together and they advocate together as one voice, especially here in Texas, we can really get the ball moving. And of course, they know that nothing's going to happen in DC at the federal level without Texas really taking the lead. And so we really focus on keeping strong relationships with our U.S. senators and our U.S. congressmen here in Texas, as well as our local elected officials. Because sometimes when policy is not moving in the federal realm, you'll see smaller kind of policies start to build up at the state and local level. And so we also want to make sure that those are reflective of the workforce needs, which brings us to what we're doing here today, which is talking about immigration. So I'm not sure if you've all seen the report that we released about 2 weeks ago with the Longview Chamber of Commerce. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I'll make sure, and as a follow-up to this, that we send out those links. But what we looked at was how are immigrants affecting the economy in the Longview MSA, as well as Gregg County more broadly. And we'll go into a little bit later some other resources where you can look at it by your congressional district, and then also some larger regions as well. But I'm not going to go through that whole report again, but just as some top line findings, I think the biggest takeaway was that immigrants in y'all's region, they make up about 7.8% of the population, yet they're contributing a little over 9% to the GDP and then in taxes. And so they're really overperforming. And I think what was extremely interesting was that over 11% of your business owners are immigrants. And so they're making huge contributions to the region, and they're really big drivers of growth as well. So about a year and a half ago within Texas, with working with the different chambers of commerce, we launched a business coalition called Texans for Economic Growth. And what this business coalition is trying to do is help get the different business industries out of the different silos they're in. So a lot of times you'll see high-skilled tech folks. They're always advocating for different reforms on immigration. You'll see your ag folks, you'll see hospitality, you'll see construction. Yet what we found is that they're all advocating or talking about immigration by themselves. And like I previously mentioned, when we work together, we know that we can actually get our senators and our congressmen to really pay attention. And so our goal was to bring them all together and bring them together in a way that we're not fundraising, we're not asking for money. And so there's absolutely no financial contribution whatsoever. Our goal was really just to bring different folks from across the state together to really start having a better conversation about immigration, and so that we can have a better understanding of where Texas is in general, specifically the business community, which brings us here to East Texas. So we have a lot of participation from the big metros, as you would assume. We're starting to get some more representation from West Texas and North Texas. But really outside the Longview Chamber of Commerce, we really haven't been able to talk to a lot of folks in East Texas. And so that's where we come to y'all today, is really want to hear from y'all on what you're hearing about immigration within your own circles, whether that's within your church or within your own business or within just your family and friends, to kind of get a better understanding of what y'all are hearing. If there's anything that's a little scary to talk about that maybe we can help get y'all through, and then also see what resources that we can give y'all to have a better narrative around immigration, because we understand, and especially in times when workforce is kind of in flux, unemployment numbers have changed dramatically in the last couple of months, we know that's going to be a really hard conversation over the next probably year or so about how are we talking about immigrants in a way that is constructive, that's going to get us to a place where what we believe in 2021 will be the time when there's going to be a very large immigration package move through DC. And so we want to make sure that Texas is leading that conversation. And part of that is going to be talking to y'all here today. I'll briefly mention before I kind of jump into some questions. Later next month, June 17th, we're going to be having a coalition-wide call where we're going to be diving really into a comprehensive immigration reform package that we've been working on. And we'll invite all of you to come and listen to that. There's usually about 50 or 60 people on that call, so it's a very large call, but you'll learn a ton, and it'll connect you with a lot of different business leaders across the state as well. So I think my first question to y'all will be, if you have any just questions right off the bat that you want to get answered, and then also just kind of an intro about what are y'all hearing or talking about immigration? Is this the first time that we're talking about it, or is this something that y'all are really interested in discussing more? I'll turn it over to y'all.
All right, so it looks like Bill, it looks like you're still muted if you're speaking. So we're going to turn this over now to like a discussion portion of the meeting. And so really this is for us to understand. It's really, it's a back and forth, like all good discussions are. Chelsie really wants to understand where we are in East Texas and even having this conversation. Where are you as a business? Where are you in your communities? Like you said, whether it's a church organization, your neighborhood, your friends get together. As a chamber, obviously, we're very interested in how does this affect our economy, specifically our business economy, and even more specifically, our chamber members. How does this impact you as a chamber member? And what are your fears? What are you excited about? What are you thinking? Hey, this would be really good if I can get this for my business. And so let's start down that conversation. We do have some questions, but I'd love to hear your conversation. Bill, it looks like you may be unmuted.
Yes, I did. Yeah, my biggest concern about is getting our employees the proper documentation and getting it easily. I have an example where we have an Australian who works for us, and to get his E3 has just been, it gets ridiculous sometimes. The paperwork gets lost, gets denied for just some minor formatting on the form or something like that. So I think we just need a easier process of documentation and approval of visas. I think that's where a lot of people get frustrated when trying to get jobs in the U.S. Legally applying is difficult and bureaucratic.
Chelsie, could you talk to the point of what successful policy would look like concerning the difficulty that folks are having? Just again,
almost needs to be a streamlined online form, because right now my camera's moving. Right now you have to fill out a paper form and send it in. I think I was actually able to email it in, but it's a cumbersome report to fill out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we hear across the board and across the nation. And so you're no different in that at all. I mean, we have an immigration system that's older than I am. And so, of course, it hasn't been able to keep up with just the technological advances that we have. I mean, this is the first year that some of those forms were able to be submitted online, which is just absolutely ridiculous at this point. And so when we're looking at a comprehensive immigration package, or even just a visa package alone, that is one of the #1 things that we're focusing on, is that has to be a streamlined system. And we have to look at immigration in a more holistic and comprehensive way too. So right now our immigration system is really family-based. And so that just, the effect of that is that when we're looking at workforce visas for folks that are not related to someone here in the United States, everything is much more convoluted and there's a lot of nuance there. And that burden really falls either on that immigrant trying to find someone to sponsor them that's willing to go through this process, or the business owner themselves. And on top of that, we see this black market has kind of popped up in the shadows, where it's taking advantage of folks that are looking for these different visas, which is just, I mean, it's not good for anyone at any level. And so my question though to you, Bill, is when it comes to employing immigrants and going through the visa process for them, have you ever heard from other folks in your community wondering why you're not hiring someone local, a native born American? Is that a conversation that ever happens, or is it we need the best person available regardless of where they're from?
In our case, it was just hiring somebody from from the industry that had specific experience, right? It was proposal writing and a marketing manager, which specific for our industry, there's nobody local that we could hire without having to do a few years training.
Right. Very good. Has anyone else had a similar problem when it comes to visas? Because I know, kind of giving you some perspective about what we've been hearing in other parts of the state, is a lot of times from our landscaper companies, our construction companies, whether that's commercial or residential, and a lot of hospitality, is that there's just not a low skill visa available, which I think is one of the biggest myths that our coalition and anyone talking about immigration reform right now needs to help dispel, is that there's just not a way for, let's say if I'm from Central America and I hear there's some really great construction jobs in Houston or Dallas, and I know that they're available and I can be hired, there's absolutely not a pathway to do that unless I'm already basically related to someone or I win a lottery. And so that's something that we're trying to work through, is how can we help people understand that there's not an easy way for people to come here legally to work in some of these, especially these lower skill positions, but yet there is quite great demand for it. I know I'm here in Houston today. In Houston, I mean, they're always struggling to find higher skilled construction workers. And a lot of these folks want to come over, but there's just not a way to get them here and keep them here legally. And so that's a big issue that we've seen a lot in the Gulf Coast Gulf Coast counties. So I wonder if that's something that y'all are hearing in East Texas, just among family and friends or other coworkers.
Yes. Hello. I want to have a couple questions, Chelsie. I'm Jose Sanchez. I'm an immigration lawyer here in Longview. I do family immigration. I know some basic concepts of employment immigration, but I don't do that. And also I'm an immigrant, came here undocumented. So this is, directly up my alley, but also do a lot of personal injury as well, dealing with immigrants. But one of the first questions I had is, how is immigrant defined in your study? Because I think that's very important to determine that from the publicity wise, what is an immigrant, and I think that's something that as a whole, from anything, not just chamber, but government policy, is that word immigrant has become you could be third generation, but you look, you're very dark and you're from Africa, your heritage, but I mean, you've been here 3 generations, but people gonna look at you and say, no, you're an immigrant, or so that's the kind of thing that's I want to get from you. How did y'all define immigrant, and how is that being portrayed as to what it is for the study purposes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I hate that I didn't preface with that. I usually do when we talk about reports or numbers at all. But we define an immigrant as anyone born outside the United States. So that includes your refugees, your visa holders, your TPS holders, your DACA recipients, undocumented immigrants, what have you. If you're born outside the United States, you're included within our studies. And there are some reports that we've done, like for the North Texas Commission or some of the larger metro regions, where we pulled out just undocumented numbers. And so it will actually say in that report if we're just talking about the undocumented population, but otherwise it includes every single immigrant. And so that's how we define an immigrant. And that is a great question, because that's, of course, going to lead when we're talking about immigration, to help people understand that, they're making huge contributions at every level. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that answers that. And that's what I thought it was, but I want to clarify exactly what it meant. And also to answer one of your questions you had for us, as an immigration lawyer, I get a lot of business owners that call me that have Juan and Jose that have been working for them for 15, 20 years. And, they know they're not have documentation. They want to do everything to help them. And then they come to my office and I explain to them, kind of like what you said, because Juan and Jose have already broken the immigration law by being here without permission. There's nothing the employer can do to help them get legal status or get a work visa. Because if that was the case, I'd tell them I'd be a multimillionaire, because just imagine how many people we could get legal from these employers, because employers want to help them. And so what I explained to them is, well, there is a process you can try and get Juan and Jose's cousins or siblings in Mexico or other countries that have never been here before, and you can apply for the government to show that you can't find any Americans to do the job that you're specifically looking for. And there's a process, but it costs money, a lot of red tape. The government's going to have complete access to all your financials, to everything you do. You have to do a marketing plan to advertise to show that you can't find any Americans to do that local job. And so a lot of employers are going to be like, well, no, that's just too much red tape, too much money. You have to have workers' compensation. And so they just say, no, I'll just keep hiring Juan and Jose, or I'll just keep hiring people that aren't documented. So I think it's a lot of it is, as an advocate for immigrants, but also pro-business, is finding that balance of, from the publicity, from the public, the ones that get the negative is the immigrants themselves, and they're just here trying to work, where I don't think there's a lot of against the employers. You know what I'm saying? To me, it's when I have this discussion, I've had numerous, with different people around the world, is, to me, immigration is supply and demand. So the employers are demanding this cheap labor and skilled, not just cheap, but sometimes it's the skilled, and they can't find it here locally. So obviously they're going to hire them. But if you take the employer away, or you make it more difficult, more fines, more raids, which we're seeing more of now in the Trump administration, then that causes less people to come here. And so as an immigrant and an advocate, I feel bad that it's just the people, the workers that are getting hated at, they're being thrown at. It's not the employers. You know what I'm saying? And so finding that balance of making sure they're both coming in together, saying, it's not just the employees, but it's also the employers that are being accountable. Or how do you find that balance for them to work together to show it's best for everybody? And then the biggest defense, like your question you asked, is the biggest reason I see employers hiring undocumented immigrants is because they say they can't find somebody here locally to do that specific job and to stay on that job for a long time. They might hire them for a week or two, and then they quit because they don't want to work, because it's hard work, or it's lower pay than they normally are. And so I think that's something of educating the public as to, and I think if you educate the public in that way, it makes it easier to come up a comprehensive reform, because they understand the ins and outs. I'll give you an example that I always give, and it really upset me, is here locally, because we're talking about here in Longview. KLTV is the largest TV station in East Texas, ABC affiliation. And a couple of years ago, they would do a story and say, Juan Gonzalez, an illegal alien, got arrested today for drunk driving, something like that. They thought that would start the thing. And so I emailed him to the manager, and I said, why do you have to say illegal alien? It has nothing to do with the story. It has nothing related to DWI. And why are you saying that? Do you say John Smith, an American citizen, got arrested today for DWI? No, you don't say that. You don't see that. And to me, that's another example of this media that has the largest audience in East Texas. If you can't get their managers and their people up high to buy into this, they don't see the effects of saying stuff like that, then it's going to be harder to have this immigration reform, because you're going to have people like those managers, people that have those attitudes, to really agree to come up and help these immigrants from the employee point of view, but also from the employer point of view. And so those are just some examples of that, and I have hundreds of them, but those are just ones that I would share to show how it is here in Longview, how it is here in East Texas, trying to get people to buy in when it comes to buying in to get a comprehensive immigration reform. So I like the study that you did, because there's things that we can do as a chamber to advocate this immigration reform, but it's going to have to be of showing out these positive things, because the stereotype is they're clogging up the medical emergency rooms. They don't contribute any taxes. They get all this free money, all these things. But when you can produce with numbers to kind of show the positive stuff about this, then I think that's when you're going to get more people involved. But it's going to have to come from, the chamber president, the chamber people, the CEO of the big companies here in Longview, the politicians from Longview. Yeah, they're going to get ridiculed, because there's a lot of, base of the GOP that doesn't like this, that doesn't want this thing because they think immigrants are going to get a freebie. So that's why it's hard, to get to that balance. So I can understand as a CEO, if I were a CEO of a big company and I'm advocating all this immigration reform, how there's going to be some base that's going to be coming out and saying, why are you choosing them over us? How come we have an unemployment here? How come we can't get hired? So I think that's kind of the struggle that we have. And I don't think it's just locally. I think it's probably in the whole United States. And I'm sure you see it all the time.
Oh yeah, no, Jose, thank you. You brought up a lot of really, really great points. And I think the first one I'll jump to is when you talked about how immigration is a supply and demand issue. And that's absolutely what it is. America is growing rapidly, even in COVID times. And so we need to have workers to, can keep growing our economies because a growing one is a successful one, right? So but it's going back to dispelling that first myth about what is an illegal immigrant. And I know Mark and I had this discussion last week, and he was like, well, you say undocumented and I say illegal, like, does it matter? And to some folks, it absolutely matters. But it's helping people understand that, again, there's not really a way to come to the United States and work for jobs when there are employers who want to employ you. And that's probably the biggest myth that we have to dispel. Like, there's not an easy way to do it. But again, having someone from a national organization in DC or having a congressman from California say it, that's not helpful at the local level. We have to have local leaders to help tell these stories, to be able to say, like, hey, I own this large company and I can't find workers. I wish that I could hire all of these immigrants that are trying to come over, but there's not a visa system available for them to even come over here. And if they are already over here as an undocumented immigrant, there's no way I can hire them because then I'll be attacked either from my business, my board of whoever, or ICE, or whoever it might be. And so it's helping tell that story more locally is a lot of what we're trying to focus on is, again, helping business owners tell that story to their employees themselves, so that the chambers can then say it, so that when you're sitting at a happy hour or Thanksgiving dinner and someone mentions some off comment on immigration, you can actually correct them and say, hey, actually the immigrants in our community are contributing a lot more than they are taking out. And this all goes back down to, we need our policy leaders to feel brave enough to be able to talk about this. We do a lot of closed session meetings with different congressmen, and we've done it across Texas for some of our higher end leaders, and they need their voter base to understand this issue and be able to advocate them for it, because they're not going to stand up there by themselves and talk about how we do need a pathway for some kind of permanent status for the undocumented immigrants that we have here in Texas. You're not going to get a Republican congressman to stand up and say that unless he knows that his voting base also wants that as well. When we have one-on-one conversations, they all agree. Absolutely, that's what we need. But I can't say it unless my voters say it, because we send them to DC to represent their voters, right? So that's where our local communities come in and are so important. Because we can start having this discussion now and saying, okay, our biggest problem in our region is that people don't understand that there's not a way for our undocumented immigrants to even get a visa. So let's tell them that first, let them know that these immigrants are still paying taxes and still contributing, and try to figure out, how do we fix this right now? We know that they're raising families. If you're a DACA recipient, you could have gone to a Texas A&M or University of Texas. You could be teaching in a school right now. You could, be highly educated, and yet your status is in flux because there isn't a permanent solution for you, right? It's a very complicated conversation. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but that's why it's so important for the business community to be able to have this conversation. If that makes sense.
Jose, thank you so much for adding your experience and using local stories, because I think that's truly where we get the benefit of this conversation, is understanding what the temperature here is, right? If you grew up here, you kind of know just from your conversations with aunts and uncles and church members where that is, but having those local examples, like kind of the media bias, even with the language that we have, how we go about even having the conversation and using certain language. And I appreciate Chelsie having that conversation with me last Friday, because how to have that conversation so that we simply can have the conversation about the facts, right? Because I think that if we have a conversation based on feelings, we have a whole lot of different conversations than we have a conversation based on facts. Chelsie, Jose used a word that I love, and he used the word balance. One of my favorite words. How do we balance the needs of our business community with the needs of the folks that want to come into our country, right? So, because although it is extremely filled with red tape, it's burdensome. As Bill said, it is just extremely difficult to get somebody that's already here working to get them documented. Understanding that, we still have quite a few immigrants that legally pass through our borders and become citizens every year, more so than most nations in the entire world. Of course, that's because they probably want to come to the United States more than most nations in the world. How broken is the system, and how do we balance? I mean, the flip side is, from being really sticky and really cumbersome and hard to deal with, the other polar opposite is we let everybody in, right? And I'm not hearing anybody advocating for that, right? I'm just saying, how do we find that balance between nobody can come in? Oh, my hand is in there. You go. Nobody can come in and everybody can come in. How do we find that balance, and how do you advocate for making sure that it's common sense what we're doing?
Sorry, I was trying to find my mouse to unmute myself. Yes, I think I love that question, because I mentioned earlier that, you know, our immigration system is ancient at this point. It really hasn't had a big overhaul. And the problem with that is it's not reflective of current economic needs. It's not agile at all. I mentioned that our immigration system is based on family reunification right now, which family is incredibly important for the success of any immigrant that's coming over. We know that if they have, you know, a family unit here in the United States, they're more likely to be successful and be great contributors to our economy. However, there are other immigrants that don't have anyone here in the United States that are going to be great contributors. I mean, think about all of the medical tourism that Texas gets. We also educate a ton of doctors and healthcare workers. However, there's not enough visas available for them. So we educate them here in Texas. They want to stay in Texas, yet there's not always a visa available for them. Yet you have other countries who are more than willing to take our highly educated doctors from us, or that we have to send them back home when these folks who want to stay here, they've already started building families here. And we know they're going to be great contributors, especially in times like a pandemic. And so it's crazy that we don't have a system that we can just flip a switch and say, oh my gosh, we do need more healthcare workers right now. And there's a lot of immigrants who fill those gaps, and we need them right now. So when we talk about, and this has been an issue for a lot of Texas business owners, and of course nationwide, when we talk about a comprehensive immigration system, it has to be flexible and agile. We should be able to look at immigration almost annually and be able to, you know, work with the Department of Labor and say, these are the needs in different sectors right now. So we need more healthcare workers right now. We should open up those visas a little bit larger, or we need more construction workers. And that also comes down to maybe there should be more focus on local control and regional needs. I mean, think about it. Texas might need a lot more agricultural workers than Utah, or we might need more construction workers after a hurricane. So there needs to be a way for us to look at things almost in real time and be able to work with that. And right now, when unemployment is skyrocketing, we should be able to take a step back and look at, you know, who are we bringing in? Are those the right folks for the jobs that are open right now, and the regional needs as well? So it needs to work both ways. And I think that's a conversation the business community can have with anyone. I mean, you can sit down with your congressman and say, hey, shouldn't our system be reflective of the economic needs of today, not 30 years ago? And I can't imagine any person on either side of the aisle would disagree. They're going to agree with that. And so then that next step is saying, okay, we agree. How can I get you across that finish line to actually get something done? And I mentioned this in previous conversations, but we really do think 2021, regardless of how November goes, is going to be a year when there's going to be some very large immigration packages, whether that's a complete overhaul of the system or just some very large packages together. And so we need to make sure that our elected officials know that that's something that we're advocating for. We need a system that is reflective of our needs literally in real time.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Chelsie. I appreciate that, because you're right. When we were at 3 to 4% unemployment, it's actually an easier conversation to have for immigration reform than when it's 13%, right? And it's like, well, so the conversation shouldn't be any different, right? Maybe the lever or the switch as you use, maybe that needs to be part of the conversation, so that, okay, we need to scale back so our local folks have jobs, okay, but now we need to scale forward when our companies, and so I don't know that I coined this phrase, but many of our businesses, in Mark's opinion, in the next 10 years are going to have to decide, do we immigrate or do we automate, right? Do we give people these jobs? And I think it's a combination of both. We are a nation built by immigrants, of immigrants, whether I'm sixth generation or first generation, we truly are immigrants. And so that's why it's always a conversation. Yes, it gets very political, but in the business realm, what I'm saying is my friends and I, we're not having as many children, right? But our business needs continue to escalate every year. And I don't have the stats to prove that other than the conversations I'm having, but we're going to need a workforce, or we're going to need to either immigrate or find some way to create a mechanized process for those jobs. And so I'm excited about this conversation, because I think ultimately in the next decade, it's going to fill a void that we're going to have, or those jobs go somewhere else. And so I'm passionate about our local workforce. So anyways, on to other conversations.
Hey, Mark, I want to make something with that subject before I forget. Something that I always talk to my not so pro immigrant group of friends, which is a lot of them, is I try and tell them, like Chelsie brought up the facts. When you're looking at they're taking their jobs, we need to think about Americans first. When you look at the numbers, it's the undocumented immigrant population is such a small amount of the whole total labor force in the United States that, I mean, Chelsie, I haven't checked the latest, but I'm sure it was like 5 or 6 or 7% at the most nationwide of the whole total labor force. So how can this small percentage be taking everybody's jobs? You know what I'm saying? And I think that's sort of a practical. When I tell my friends, it's like if you have a school and there's 3% of the kids need extra help because they're just not really at the level of the other ones, are you going to spend millions of dollars just on those 3 or 4%? Well, no, it doesn't make business sense, because there's other things maybe can be done. So when we're talking about the raids, the enforcements, the detention centers, of all the money that costs us billions and billions of dollars from our tax dollars, and we're going after that such a small percent, wouldn't it make more sense that what can we do positively with that small 5 or 6% that's actually going to contribute and help us out in the long run? You know what I'm saying? It's trying to use, instead of going after them, let's use them to help us as a whole. And so people make it want to seem like they're all taking our jobs. Then you're visualizing that it's 30%, 40% of the whole workforce is undocumented and they're taking our jobs, when in reality it's such a small amount that it really doesn't make a big difference in the big scheme of things. Now there's going to be California, Texas, there's going to be a bigger percentage of the workforce, but I'm saying as a whole country, that number is such a small amount, if I'm not mistaken, Chelsie.
No, that is true. And my response to that would be, why are people feeling that way? And I even had these conversations with my own family. We talk about the undocumented population, and that's usually where the sticking point is. We can always get people to agree that we need more healthcare workers or higher educated immigrants. Like, everyone's on board with that. But we start talking about an undocumented population, and people kind of they get nervous. They just like, well, they broke the law. It doesn't matter, right? And that's okay. I think first we have to say it's okay that that's where you're at right now. You think that they broke the law. That's a problem, but we can get you past that. We just have to talk to them in a way that they can understand. And so I think and you please correct me if any of y'all have heard differently, but I think a lot of that fear comes from, so we have a small percentage are undocumented right now. And let's say we give them all some kind of status, some kind of permanent legal status. I'm not saying that everyone can vote, but let's say that we let everyone who can pass a background check, pay back taxes, have some kind of permanent status, right? Well, I think in a lot of the anti-immigrant communities' thoughts are they're thinking, well, people are just going to continue to keep coming, right? We're going to just have, we're going to give all these people some kind of form of amnesty right now, and then next year we're going to have, people coming across the border again, and we're going to have to do this every single year. And in their minds, they're thinking these people are just breaking our laws over and over and over again, right? And so I think what the conversation we need to have is shift that a little bit and say, well, hey, why do we have so many undocumented immigrants? Because we have a system that doesn't allow for us to easily be able to figure out who needs to be here, when they need to be here. It's just, it takes you 5 to 10 years to go through the system, even if you're related to someone here. And so it's a symptom of a broken system. And I think that's that's how we start that conversation with someone, to say, well, we have an undocumented population because we have a broken system. If we fix that system, then we're going to turn down that amount of undocumented immigrants that you're so worried about. And we're going to be able to give the undocumented immigrants that are here and working hard some kind of status. And then we're going to have a system to be able to identify who shouldn't be here and be able to make sure that those illegal aliens that everyone's so worried about, like the cartel members and gang members and human traffickers, those are the folks that we're concentrating on then, not these hardworking immigrants that are coming here and building our homes and our roads, right? So I think it's just making sure that when we're talking about it, it's saying that it's a symptom of a system that's been broken for 30 years. We can fix it. We absolutely can fix it, and that will fix that problem.
I think up until about 2.5 months ago that our unemployment was so low that they were looking at granting more work visas because, we needed more people in our workforce. Now, COVID's obviously turned that around, but I would think that hopefully in the next 6 months, we'll be back in that situation where we need to grant more work visas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a couple different, and we'll talk a little bit about this in our coalition-wide call in June. There's a couple different bills that have either moved through the House or moved through the Senate, and they're on opposite houses right now, that deal with that specifically. And one of them is a recapture bill for healthcare visas that hadn't been used previously, to be able to help fill some of these gaps for some of these different healthcare workers that we need right now. And then there's also a bill that's called the country caps bill, which eliminates the different country caps that we have now. And so I won't get into too much of that, but basically we cap the amount of visas from certain countries like India, when as business owners and business leaders, we believe that we should be able to pull in as the right folks, regardless of where they're from, instead of capping it for certain countries. And so that's kind of along that same vein. Both of those bills are, supported across the aisle, and so we'll see those start, I think, to move a little bit more once we're a little bit more in the post-pandemic world, which fingers crossed is sooner than later. But yeah, I agree. We were starting to get to that point where people were saying we do need more work visas, and then how do we get there? And then COVID struck. But again, 2021 is going to be a really, really important year for immigration.
Chelsie, so we feel like in this conversation so far that the structure, the system itself is broken. We're not saying that there shouldn't be laws, right? Because we are a nation of laws, right? And when your initial action is, I've got to break the law to do this, whether you're in a car accident or you're crossing the border, regardless, you kind of look at that first action and say, okay, but we built this existence with the beginning action being illegal. All right, so I think that when I'm having this conversation, as you said, with friends and family, the question is, well, the statement is, well, it's illegal. What they're doing is illegal. And the fact is that's right. Right. I mean, what someone does when they come over undocumented and they immigrate into the city or into the city, country, state, illegally, it starts with an illegal action. How do you have that conversation And is it a changing of our law, or is it a changing of perception that we need? Which one comes first? And I guess where I'm going with that is, how do we balance the needs legally of our communities and our businesses with the law? Because it seems like, even though the system is very sticky, that we have programs out there like work visas. We do have the pathway to citizenship, although it is rocky and it is filled with red tape. Do we fix the systems in place, or do we start over again?
Yeah, that's the question that they're all having in the back hall of the Capitol, for sure. I think to answer your question, when we're talking with your friends and family, it's always that it's not an either or situation. It's an and. Like, we can have secure borders and a legal immigration system that works. We're not advocating for illegal actions to immigrate here. Absolutely not. We want there to be a system so that every immigrant who's coming here has a legal pathway to do it. We know who they are, and we know where they are, and we know what jobs they're filling. That's what everyone wants, and that's what we want. And it's helping our congressmen and our senators and our president understand that is what we want, and we can have both. We can absolutely have both. Law versus perception is hard, because which is coming first? We're not going to change any laws when the perception is so negative against what's going on. And so it's separating our drug cartel leaders and human traffickers away from our hardworking immigrants that are making sure that we have food on our table, right? That's a perception problem. And we have to change that to almost give our policy leaders courage to take that next step. Those conversations have to happen, in my opinion, at least locally and at the small level. They're not going to come from a talking head on a news station anywhere, because there's just not enough time to talk about it in a 30-second soundbite. And so we have to go around and educate folks like business leaders, community leaders, faith leaders, to be able to help them have the conversation, and then be brave themselves, and then start to bridge that gap between who your policy leader is and then what conversations they're having. So if you're feeling brave and you can have this conversation in a way and say, hey, we can talk about immigration and not be at each other's throats, then you can bring that into your congressman's office that you know, or that goes to your church, and just say, hey, let's just sit down and talk about this in a really calm way. And that's going to move the needle. I know that's not exciting. It doesn't sound exciting. I'm not storming the Capitol with ideas, but that's where it's going to have to start.
So I have some very childhood great friends, Cervantes family. Two of them are doctors, one's a teacher and one's a housewife, and just fantastic family. And so I advocate, and their parents were undocumented. I mean, it's just, and didn't know that growing up, didn't care growing up, right? They were just good friends, right? And then also police chief in Corpus Christi and I have a conversation. We talked about it on Friday, how his biggest issues in that area come from cartel, right? So the issue with me is finding good facts, right? Is because the undocumented nature of the whole conversation is, I'm just trying to find out, one side is going to say everybody coming over undocumented is a human trafficker, rapist, serial killer, and the other side is going to say everybody coming over is a DACA recipient, Harvard grad. All right, I need to know how many are on either side, so that when we have these conversations, we're having a balance, we're having a common sense conversation. So where do you go to get that information?
Yeah, great question. And I think for y'all are lucky, because we just came out with the Longview report. What we always tell people is, or at least I do, is when you talk about these numbers, make sure you tell people this is government data we're using, because you'll find studies that come from different places and come from all over, and we really don't know where that data is coming from. We pull from government sources so that we know that it's accurate. So we start with that. But if you're looking at talking more broadly to people across the state, I think one of the easiest places to get these numbers that are continually updated as we get the newer numbers from the government is maptheimpact.org. If you go there, it's super simple. And again, it's maptheimpact.org. You can go to all the different states. You can see it countrywide, all the numbers that we have in a really simple panel. You can even then drill down either by major metro area or congressional district, and then A little bit later this year, we'll also have countywide data across the country too. So we're going to be able to drill these numbers down really locally, so that when you mention it to someone and someone says, oh no, there's immigrants are not contributing in my community, you can say, hey, actually you should go just go look it up, just see, and then they can have a better conversation then from there. I think starting from a place of facts is a good place to start. And just slowly kind of moving that needle on some of these folks that are a little unsure about immigration to begin with. With that being said, there's always going to be folks who are going to be anti-immigrant. There's always going to be folks that are going to be racist or misogynistic or whatever it is. There's always going to be those people. So if you run into someone like that, we're going to have to agree to disagree and then move on to someone else who might be a little bit more open to having a more constructive conversation. And it always goes back down to, look, this is like Jose said, a supply and demand issue. For a growing economy, we need a workforce, and there are people available to fill those gaps.
Thank you, Chelsie. So we're running down. We got about 7 minutes left, and I know we've got Courtney Smith. We got a couple callers. Any other questions from anyone else on the phone today for Chelsie? All right. What a great conversation. I mean, this has been a really robust conversation. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Very important to us to have a good conversation, an open conversation, and knowing that we have something called the Public Policy Committee, and I chair that at the Longview Chamber, as well as the Kilgore Chamber, and we're part of the East Texas Coalition, and we have that also at a joint level. And I would just like to thank Chelsie. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. This is very important when it comes to us getting policy right, specifically local policy, where we're looking at our business needs, our community needs, making sure that we're doing it right, make sure that we're saying it right, make sure that we have the right facts. This is very important. So Chelsie, thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. Thank you for bringing facts. Thank you for bringing, honestly, a side of the conversation that we don't hear a whole lot in East Texas, and allowing us to ask questions and allow us to get information. Having this data, it really empowers us to be able to go into our community and have educated conversations, not hearsay, not this is the way I was raised or learned, and I'll use myself as an example, but let's have good, hard conversations about what we need in this community. I do believe America first. I also believe that there's a way to benefit America with a good common sense immigration policy, so that it's good for everybody who wants to become an American or work in America. So I'm excited about this conversation. Thank you. We will continue to have these conversations through our Public Policy Committee. If any of you, I know Bill has joined with us, Troy has been on. Thank you both for being on that committee with us. And Donna Sharp, thank you, sorry. Donna's on as well and has been a very active participant. So thank you for joining. If you're interested and you're on the call and you're interested in being part of our Public Policy Committee, I'd love to have you join us, and both regionally and locally. And we take those issues to DC, we take those issues to Austin, and we advocate locally, even at the city and county level, for those things that we have there. As a reminder, as we finish, unless if anybody has any final questions or comments. All right. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you at the Longview Chamber website. Again, if you're on this call, you will receive a link in your email to share with other folks. I'm excited about this conversation. Please let the Chamber know if there's any specific needs that you have that we can help you with. And other than that, Chelsie, again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the great conversation today, and take care, stay safe.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks.